Before he became the most argued about businessman in American history, John D. Rockefeller was just a quiet boy counting pennies by a frosted window where his breath steamed in the winter cold and a single lantern burned like a small promise. If you want to understand the power and controversy of the man he became, start with the ledger he kept as a child and the two opposite forces who raised him under the same roof.
John Davison Rockefeller entered the world on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York. A landscape of wooden fences, stony fields, and narrow rooms warmed by iron stoves. Life there moved to the tune of chores and weather. You woke when the light arrived, and you rested when the wind insisted. This was not a place for big speeches about destiny. It was a place for small, repeatable acts. Mend the hinge, stack the firewood, keep the Sabbath. In such rooms, a boy learns that survival is not dramatic, it is disciplined. While later critics would paint Rockefeller as flinty or relentless, the boy in Richford simply learned that steadiness sustains a family when luck will not.
At the head of that household stood two teachers, equal and opposite. William, known to neighbors as Devil Bill, traveled with bottles of cure-all and a smile that could turn a stranger into a customer. He taught by motion and performance, how to read people, how to ask a price without flinching, how to exit a conversation with more than you entered. In contrast stood Eliza, devout and restrained, who counted blessings and coins with the same care. She taught by stillness, that money obeys rules, that promises have weight, and that reputation is a savings account you never overdraw. The child absorbed both dialects, the theater of persuasion from William, the arithmetic of duty from Eliza. That unlikely combination would one day make him appear both implacable and predictable, a negotiator who smiled rarely but seldom blinked. Even as Rothschild, John loved to make totals march into columns that ended in straight lines. In a house where the difference between enough and not quite enough could be a handful of coins, record-keeping felt like protection. He counted eggs gathered, wood carried, pennies saved. He wrote them down and checked them again. The habit did not make him cold, it made him calm. Numbers were proof that effort was not wasted. A tin of coins and a notebook on the nightstand became, quietly, the first tools of his career. In those small acts of tallying, he practiced the emotionless arithmetic that later allowed him to separate personal feelings from business outcomes. Richford offered simple institutions that left deep marks, a one-room schoolhouse where chalk dust floated in winter sunbeams, and a church where the sermons were stern, steadying, and sincere. At school, John learned sums. At church, he learned rectitude, that it is better to owe no man than to impress every man. Between them, he discovered that morality and mathematics sometimes point the same way. Keep good accounts, pay your debts, and stay reliable. The Bible verses were not business plans, yet they settled into his posture like a second spine. Later, when critics called him ruthless, admirers called him reliable. Both were describing the same unyielding line he drew for himself early on. The Rockefellers did not remain in Richford forever. They moved to Moravia, to Owego, for reasons that made sense on paper, a chance at better prospects, or simply the pressures common to families with limited means. Each move taught John a truth that later echoed in steel and steam. Stability is built, not found. He learned how to walk into a new shop and quickly notice which stales were honest, which merchants measured short, which smiles were sales, and which were friendship. The addresses changed, but the lessons rhymed. Small savings compound. Trust is earned slowly, and reliable people are rare enough to be valuable.
Of course, William was not merely colorful, he was a warning label. Traveling from town to town, he thrived on charm and risk. John watched him work a porch full of strangers with a joke, a bottle, and a promise. He also saw how uncertain such a life could be, how charm sometimes replaced honesty, how profit could outrun prudence. That observation did not make the boy cynical, it made him a skeptic. He chose to keep the useful part of William's example, the poise in negotiation, while rejecting the reckless part, the habit of overpromising. In grown life, this would read as an almost mechanical style, polite but hard-edged, courteous but non-negotiable on the numbers.
Meanwhile, Eliza governed the household with economies that were also ethics. She taught that giving to the church did not contradict saving for the future. Both were forms of faithfulness. She stacked pantry shelves with order that made thrift feel like grace. She showed John that generosity without arithmetic becomes self-deception, and arithmetic without generosity becomes a small soul. The balance quieted him. He could be exact and still be human. Years later, when Rockefeller funded universities and public health campaigns, admirers would see the Eliza inside him. Methodical giving with measurable results, charity as investment in human flourishing.
As Rockteen, John grew tall but stayed deliberate. While other boys gambled time on idle talk and dares, he discovered the pleasure of time well used. He learned that hours, like dollars, could be budgeted. Instead of chasing every novelty, he practiced the quiet art of showing up, on time, prepared, steady. He measured chores as if they were contracts. He measured promises as if they were loans. He wasn't yet the architect of a trust, he was the curator of a reputation. In towns where news moves faster than wagons, that mattered. People learned if young Rockefeller said he would do it, he did it, and he wrote it down.
Not all education came from books. John watched how neighbors bartered, eggs for sugar, flour for lamp oil, and he noticed where value leaked. He saw that the person who understood transport, timing, and storage often won without raising his voice. He learned how prices flatten when roads are bad, how they spike when storms delay deliveries, how merchants who manage inventory and information quietly beat those who only manage talk. These were tiny lessons, but they scaled. Later, when he integrated refining, transport, and distribution, his decisions looked grand. In truth, they were only bigger versions of what he learned on footpaths and general store counters.
By his mid-teens, John's notebooks were not just records, they were mirrors. In tidy columns, he could see himself becoming the person he meant to be, careful, solvent, trustworthy. Ledgers gave him patience. He could withstand a dull week because the math would reward the habit. They gave him courage. He could negotiate without fear because he knew what he could afford to yield and what he must protect. And they gave him vision. If numbers could be arranged into order, perhaps work, people, and processes could be arranged into systems. The boy who kept accounts would grow into the man who kept complex organizations in line.
Eventually, the path pointed west toward Cleveland, where bookkeeping and commerce beckoned. John did not rush, he prepared. He wrote out a simple creed, never boasting, merely binding. Work steadily, save relentlessly, honor commitments, keep excellent records. He folded the paper as if sealing a contract with himself. The rooms of Richford faded behind him, but the rules of Richford traveled in his trunk. The choice to leave was not rebellious, it was consistent with everything he had practiced. He was not seeking a new identity, he was scaling the old one. Later decades would load his name with arguments, monopolist or modernizer, robber baron or systems genius. Yet those debates orbit a core that was already present by 1853. Discipline without spectacle, records without romance, promises kept without applause. If you want to grasp the engine of Rockefeller's life, begin with the boy in a cold room, carefully counting. He did not know the size of the future. He knew the method that would carry him to it. And methods, unlike luck, can be repeated.